The business of professional sports is built on a carefully constructed illusion. Owners, executives, and the mainstream sports media want fans to believe everyone is united. They want you to think the players, the union, and the league are all moving together toward one glorious, profitable future. For the past year, the WNBA has been selling that exact story. You've seen the record-breaking television ratings. You've seen sold-out arenas across the country. You've seen charter flights finally introduced after years of complaints. By every mainstream metric, the WNBA just experienced the biggest cultural and financial boom in the history of women's sports. And let's be honest about something. Much of that explosion was powered by Caitlin Clark, a transcendent rookie who brought unprecedented attention to the league. This should be the beginning of a dynasty. This should be the moment when every player in the league is securing their future and preparing for a golden era of opportunity. But that's not what's happening. Instead, the WNBA is standing on the edge of a dangerous internal conflict, a self-inflicted standoff that threatens to fracture the league at the very moment it finally has momentum. If you think the upcoming collective bargaining negotiations are just a normal dispute about salaries and travel conditions, you're missing the bigger picture. Behind the scenes, this is turning into a high-stakes power struggle, a fight fueled by resentment, cultural divides, and competing visions for the future of the league. Veteran players are playing a risky game with the most valuable asset the WNBA has ever had, the fans. And some of them appear willing to push the conflict to the breaking point. Meanwhile, much of the mainstream sports media has been reluctant to explain the full complexity of the situation. Turn on the major networks or read the biggest sports publications, and you'll hear a simplified narrative. The players opted out of their deal to pursue a larger and more equitable share of league revenue. On the surface, it sounds like a straightforward labor story, players seeking fairness against billionaire ownership. But beneath that polished public relations narrative, tensions inside the Women's National Basketball Association Players Association are growing. The image of total unity is beginning to crack, and divisions inside locker rooms across the league are becoming harder to ignore. And according to veteran sports commentator Jason Whitlock, the real story behind the scenes may be far more complicated than what fans are being told. Listen closely as he lays out a perspective that many in mainstream sports media have been hesitant to address.
And it seems like it's going to split. I don't think most people are recognizing this, but the white girls are ready to end this whole deal and sign the deal. They don't want to. They don't want to strike. The black girls are still holding out and they're oppressed, and they want to play this to the bust. You got Kelsey Plum, you got Brianna Stewart basically saying, hey, look, we need to play this season. It's important. We don't need to strike. And then you have
What you're hearing right now is the sound of a fractured union. This is no longer just a routine negotiation over revenue splits. It has evolved into something much deeper, a cultural proxy battle unfolding inside the league. To understand the magnitude of the crisis, you first have to understand how professional sports unions actually work. In any collective bargaining negotiation, leverage is everything. Players in the National Basketball Association have enormous leverage because their league generates billions of dollars in global television revenue. If those players strike, the financial losses for owners begin immediately. The same is true for the National Football League. Professional football is such a dominant part of American culture that any disruption threatens a massive economic machine. But the Women's National Basketball Association has historically operated under very different circumstances. For much of its existence, the league struggled financially and was heavily supported by the National Basketball Association just to remain operational. For more than 2 decades, the players simply didn't have the economic leverage that athletes in other leagues enjoyed. Then everything changed. The arrival of Caitlin Clark altered the entire economic landscape of women's basketball almost overnight. Suddenly, the league had a superstar capable of drawing millions of viewers, selling out arenas, and turning regular season games into must-watch events. For the first time in its history, the WNBA finally had real negotiating leverage. But instead of using that momentum strategically, a vocal group of veteran players within the union chose to escalate the conflict. And in doing so, they didn't just challenge the owners. They began clashing with the very forces that helped generate this new wave of attention and revenue. What we're seeing now isn't a united labor front. It's a fragmented power struggle with competing agendas inside the same organization. And that internal tension is starting to alienate many players who simply want stability and a future for the league. Because behind the scenes, there are athletes quietly asking a very serious question. What happens if this confrontation goes too far? And based on recent reports, the internal dysfunction inside the union may be far worse than most fans realize.
Listen, Whitlock kept it real. I cannot believe the way these ladies are going about this. The WNBPA is an absolute disaster. They're not on the same page. They have no idea what they're doing. They have their own players that they are representing coming out and calling them greedy and selfish. You have players coming out saying, I want to play. You have middle tier players and rookies saying, I can't afford a lockout. I'm scared. All of this stuff. The WNBPA, this has been a debacle. This has been a joke.
When the everyday members of a union begin openly expressing fear about the strategy of their own leadership, something has clearly gone wrong. At that point, it stops looking like a united labor movement and starts looking like a deep internal crisis. Think about the perspective of a middle-tier player in the league, the athlete earning somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 a year. She isn't landing massive multi-million-dollar endorsement deals. She isn't protected by huge off-court income streams. Her livelihood depends on those game checks, paying rent, supporting family, and maintaining a professional career. For players in that position, the possibility of a lockout or canceled season isn't an abstract political debate. It's a real financial risk. And that's where the tension inside the Women's National Basketball Association Players Association becomes more complicated. Some voices within the union leadership are pushing aggressively for major structural changes in revenue, sharing, and compensation. Meanwhile, other players are quietly worried about what happens if the confrontation goes too far. The concern isn't just about negotiating leverage. It's about protecting the momentum the league has recently built. Because over the last year, the WNBA has experienced one of the most significant growth periods in its history, with record viewership, packed arenas, and a surge of new attention surrounding players like Caitlin Clark. For the first time in decades, the league appears to have genuine cultural and commercial momentum. But momentum in professional sports is fragile. To understand why this situation feels so tense, you have to look at the structure of power inside any major sports league. Typically, the system operates through a delicate balance between three groups: the commissioner, the ownership groups, and the players' union. They negotiate aggressively. They fight over salaries, revenue percentages, and working conditions. But ultimately, all sides understand one fundamental truth. If the product disappears, everyone loses. Fans are the foundation of the entire ecosystem. Without people buying tickets, watching broadcasts, and supporting teams, the entire structure collapses. That's why the current negotiations carry so much weight. The WNBA recently secured a significant new media rights agreement reportedly worth over $2 billion spread across 11 years. It's a major step forward for the league and a huge improvement compared with previous deals. But even large headline numbers require context. Spread across multiple seasons and multiple teams, the revenue still has to sustain league operations, player salaries, marketing, travel, and long-term growth. That's why the current negotiations are so delicate. Public perception now plays a massive role. Many of the new fans who filled arenas this past season were drawn in by the excitement of the game itself, the energy, the rivalries, and the emergence of stars who captured national attention. Those fans tuned in to watch great basketball. And the biggest question hanging over the league right now is simple. Can the WNBA protect this momentum while navigating one of the most complex labor negotiations in its history? Because if the sport disappears from the court for too long, attention can fade quickly in the modern sports landscape. And that is the risk every side, owners, executives, and players, is trying to avoid. Next, we're going to take a closer look at some of the financial arguments being raised by players such as Natasha Cloud, and why those statements have sparked so much debate among fans and analysts. If you want deeper breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share the video. We're here to examine the stories behind the headlines. Stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.